Good morning, viewers. Now you might remember that the last video I did on this channel was where I was playing around with a table saw and trying to get to grips with it, trying to learn how it worked and what kind of stuff I needed. And I learned that everything I wanted to do basically went wrong. So the base, an executive decision has been made, and that decision is I don't care. Didn't end up working out the way I wanted it to. The extraction filter setup that I have, dust extraction is a dirt devil. Doesn't work. And I also learned that I started off the simple project of making a square in the entirely wrong way because I decided to cut a completely unstraight line with a jigsaw. Look at that. About as straight as a car falling off a cliff. But hey, it was a learning experience and I certainly learned from it. And the tool that has been at most fault here has been me. Just to let you know that this is in fact a second channel, and that if you're interested in arcade gaming, retro computers, retro consoles, or even general electronics, then you might be interested in subscribing to my main channel. I'll have a link to it somewhere up here and somewhere down here. At the moment, you should be able to see my latest video, which is about the Konami, otherwise known as the Konami System 573 arcade machine. So today what I want to do is make some new tools to help making cutting wood a bit more easier and straighter, not trapezoid shaped, unlike this square I was intending to make. Also, just to iterate again, this video is for entertainment purposes only. Don't take it as a tutorial. Please don't. I am not the person to learn from. This is never going to fit. If you're interested in engine stuff, then you may be interested in the series that my friend is doing, where he's going to stick this engine into a K11 Micra. Also, there's one person that keeps emailing me about this cabinet, asking when I'm going to start doing it, something along the name of Icone or something like that. Weird. Also, I finally realised what this thing is for, and it's for not for getting your jacket caught on it constantly like I keep doing. It's for actually holding up the upper tube of for the dust extraction. But I kind of hate this setup anyway, so. Speaking of dust extraction, I made a kind of unsurprising realization. Now in the last video, I said that this was my dust extractor, or as close as I could get to one because it didn't make sense to purchase one. And, well, it kind of works. Sort of. See, the problem is, and I should have realised this if I had gone and watched Underdone's videos again.
This is my dust collector. His name is Reginald, and he's a very happy dust collector.
I since have and remembered, oh yeah, that's not going to work. The problem is, whilst it kind of does pick up the dust and stuff, you see how the filter's completely clogged up? Well, once it gets like that, it doesn't suck up anymore, so it kind of works, but it's not great. That said, I'm still going to use it. Also, my idea of trying to put a base underneath the table saw to stop all the dust falling on the floor, no, if I had better dust extraction, that would be much less of a problem. Right, I have a problem. I'm a compulsive buyer. I also have the problem of what I want to build today kind of requires the thing that I'm trying to build today. What am I trying to build today? Well, basically I want to build a sled, and a sled is a block that goes over like this. It mounts into these two rails, and then you can move the whole thing perfectly straight. You have a, let's just use this as an example. You have a handle here, and you have a handle on the other side. You can put in straight pieces of wood. So something like this, you can cut it perfectly 90 degrees, that kind of stuff. Helps to support the piece that you're working on, and also makes other stuff a bit easier. The problem is, I need to cut this piece down because the idea is to use a rail. Obviously, if you want something cutting perfectly 90 degrees, you want something that rides in these as snugly as you can fit them. The problem I have is, no rail I've found actually fits this table saw. Most table saws have basically a U-channel kind of thing. It's, well, square channel more or less, but this doesn't has an actual T track in it. So there's not really much options. Not only does it only have a T-track in it, but because this is stamped sheet metal on the top, it means that I can't just buy a pre-made gauge that fits in here, because the first problem is all of them are too high for the table, so they actually come up and over, which is not what I need. The other problem is the sheet metal is so thin that even if I could get one that was the right height, it doesn't fit properly inside of there because it's too thin for anything to grab hold of. So I'm kind of left at the situation of either modifying something that comes with it, but I don't want to do that for the same reasons I said in the last video. It's too loose. And I can't use any pre-made thing. So my solution was to buy this bit of pine. I could shape it down, maybe cut it in half or something like that, and then fit it into the slots. And hopefully do something with that. As for whether or not it'll fit properly within the T-track and run correctly, I don't know, but it'll be better hopefully than what I've got. The other problem is, and this is an easy problem to solve, there's a stop there. This tabletop is not exactly the best top. On top of that, it's also got a kind of rough-ish finish, so it's not really smooth. Really, this is to say this is a cheap table saw. I'm kind of paying for what I got. One thing I do need to do is I need to find out where my zero mark is, because at the minute the ruler isn't actually lined up. Now I thought it was, but it turns out I never actually did that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise up the blade. This is actually unplugged, so don't worry, I'm not going to turn it on. Yeah, that'll be good enough right there. So that's the blade. Now what I want to do is basically get that lined up. So I'm going to clamp it to the blade, and hopefully the blade is 90 degrees. It looks like it might not be though, but it's hard to tell because this has another screw on it. So in fact, if anything, it might not actually be 90 degrees. So let's make it 90. In fact, I have a tool for this. Let me go get that tool. I lied. I have two tools. I have this tool and I have this tool. This is just a simple square, I think they call it. I'm not sure. I don't know the terms, as if I know what I'm doing. But this is going to be 90 degrees, as long as the whole table, everything else is 90 degrees. And I don't know, it looks close enough, but the problem is there's nothing about this table that's that level. I keep finding problem after problem. So now the problem is this plastic insert is too low to measure from. So I can't tell whether or not the blade is 90 to the table or not, because I can't even get this to be stable. So hopefully we'll try this one instead. This is a digital angle gauge. Now I have no idea how accurate it is, but hopefully it's a lot more accurate than my table is. So in fact, you know what? Let's get this squared up to this, because I can at least zero this gauge out. Okay, so that's saying 90.4. So if I just say that's 90 degrees and lock that in place, I don't think 1.1 of a degree is going to be a big issue for me at the minute. Right. According to this, that blade is 90. So let's just say that's 90 degrees, even though it doesn't look quite right. So if that blade is now 90 degrees, now what I need to do is clamp this to the blade. And what I think I'll do is try to find a place where it's going to be nice and level. This is a relatively straight piece of wood as well. Let's get a clamp. That is, according to this, straight to the blade. So hopefully I should be able to loosen off this and align that up. So that's 25.2 wide. That's 25.2 mil wide. So we know that if we put the fence on, Put that, we'll put that right up to the blade, well, the wood, like so. We know that the wood is pretty damn close to 25mm wide, so we should just have to move this so that's now moving. So let's put that back on. Right. So according to this, that's about 2.5. So I'm going to lock that down. Right, so that's locked down. So theoretically, as a rough guess, that gauge should now be roughly in the right space. Okay, so that's step 1, I think. Oh no, you're on the left now. Right, so now that we have that roughly lined up, we have an idea that we're relatively close to being centre. Now we can start to worry about what we're going to do with these slots. So this is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is 15mm wide on the dot, pretty much, give or take a few microns almost. So that's 15mm wide. Now this slot, and this is the problem I've been having, this is why just nothing fits, and hence why I'm having to make my own slides. 13. They're 13mm. So really, if I shave off 2mm of this, this should ride perfectly in there. And then what I'll do is, I'm not sure, because I don't want the runners to run the entire length, but I don't want them to be too short eitherwards. I think what I might do is have them like about 30cm or so, so they've got enough to stick it in, and then slide it in after that. So I think if we shave off 2mm and see if we can shave off 2mm, and then we'll go from there. So I want this to be just a smidgen on. Also, I'm leaving the top off because I don't need it on. Right, so that should hopefully give us 13. I think I'm not going to do the whole thing, I'm only going to do a small amount, just to test, and then we'll go from there. Well, really, I should have something for kickback, shouldn't I? We'll test. We'll see how it goes. Oh yeah, I'm not actually hooked into the audio, that would help. Right, already I don't actually like that. Now it is cutting it down, but I felt it resisting me, and I don't like that. That said, let's have a look at our measurements to see how close we were. Well, actually, if anything, 12.6. So it should. So yeah, it's a bit too loose. So this is what I did stop before I did all of that. Okay, so this works, but I don't like it. But then what do I do? Because I don't want to get this too close to the blade, do I? Also, as you noticed, I was having difficulty keeping it straight. Like I said, it would really, really help at this point in time if I had the actual tool to do this with right now. I keep kicking that, I'm sorry. So I'm going to move this over a smidgen. That should be 13. You know what, let's do this. I think I had the blade also a bit too high. which didn't help. I don't know if it didn't help, but it didn't make me feel good. Let's try that. I believe this is what a planer is supposed to be for, but we're doing what we can with what we've got. That is just a smidgen, and I mean just a smidgen over 13. Okay. And you know what? It's too tight. So this is working, not well, but it is working, but I have a sander, so I'm going to sand this off anyway, so it's nice and flat, I think. And then I can deal with the rest. I think what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to finish this off, because I would love to do it like this. In fact, I think that would be a better idea. Well, actually, I suppose if I cut off this section, the bit that is bad, because if that's about the same size as what I want, let me ponder over this and I'll come back to you. Okay, I think I've made a decision, and that is what I'm going to do is going to cut 31 later, but then I'll have this spare section here. Or did I do that backwards? Which way was this? One of them was like less than the others. Okay, that's 30. That's 31, and that is just shy of 30. So what I'll do is I'll cut this here, mount it here. That gives me something to press against as I'm shoving it through, and hopefully I can put something against this side so I can actually feel a bit safer. So what I'm going to do, and again, this is where that sled would be really handy, because now what I need to do is I need to see, I don't even have the right length, so what I'll do is I'll do that about there, because you see this is not really supported at all. This is what this is supposed to be for. Well, that and this piece here, those are supposed to fit together like so. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. I can't actually breathe through that mask. Right. So there's another thing. I did something stupid. I was here. I was basically here like that. Now what happened, you might have seen it, that piece started to do that. You know, not too bad, it's at the end, it's just clearing off that, but the problem with that is, if that got caught, that would have gone straight for me, and even something like that has enough force, if thrown hard enough, to go through a wall. So I'm not wearing Kevlar, so I should really be standing off to the side when I do this kind of stuff. Anyway, so we have our piece. What the plan is to mount this like that onto the, not necessarily onto the blade, but mount it next to it so that I've got something to guide the initial bit against, because I can't actually put the fence closer than that. The problem is that gives me about 5mm gap here. I shouldn't have touched that blade. So yeah, this is kind of necessary in this instance. So what I'll do is I'll put this block on like that, and then I'm going to clamp it. Unfortunately, I don't have a smaller clamp at the minute. Actually, no, that's not good. How am I going to... because that's not going to work. I can't clamp this to that and still run something against it. You know those moments where you think you've figured it out and then you haven't? You know, I'm not happy with what I was doing before, but I think I kind of have no choice. I can't see another way, so I'll just do what I was doing before, which isn't too bad. Just need to line up the blade again. Right people, I want you to be aware that that was actually nearly a problem. First of all, when I did that, it was going fine up until about here. And then you might have seen it, this blade did that. And that could have easily come straight back out again, so. Like I said, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just having fun really. So that's 13, it's not fitting, but that's fine, we'll just sand that down. But at least we've got something now that will attempt to fit into that rail. So I'm going to just quickly sand that down. I'm going to lower the blade though, I don't need that at the moment. Beautiful. Right, so now the plan is, what we'll have to do, I think, is to cut this down the length, and then we'll cut, yeah, we'll do that way first, and then we can do that way, and then we should have our strips. Now we need to measure the height of the table to the base of that, and ideally it should be enough to clear. So that is 8.5. Let's say 8 just to give ourselves a bit of leeway, a bit of expansion if we need it. So we need an 8mm cut down the length, which means I would have enough for 4 potentially. So we need to cut 8mm off, whilst also accounting for the size of the blade. I think that is pretty much the only, that is about as close as I can get. Right, safety squints, mask, all that good stuff. You know the drill by now. I need to stop chopping up my thing. So that I think will do fine. It's not exactly, I mean I could, if I needed to, I've still got this. But yeah, pretty much that's my rails for either side. So now what the idea is to cut this in half, and then that should be it. Right, so I need 30, which this can't measure. Well, it can, but it can't do it on this side. So we want about 30. I'm guessing that means 30 with the blade. Let's see what it says. I'm not too worried about the size. Yeah, okay. So let's flip that around. Just realised you can't actually see what I'm doing. Sorry. Alright, so that should be good enough 30. In fact, I'm just going to do, because I think this is like 32 or something like that. This piece. 61, so let's see 30.5, give them something like that. Get on the one side, and then we'll cut. And they're not perfectly in line with each other, but they don't need to be. They just need to be good enough. But that should be our rails that fit into this. Yeah. Oh, they're quite loose now. Why are they so loose? That's quite loose, but maybe that's good. I don't want them to be too much anyway, because now what we need to do is worry about getting the... So I'm basically doing this as if you know what a sled is. So the idea is to use this 9mm sheet of plywood, although there's another problem because it's kind of warped, so I'm hoping that's not going to be terrible and atrocious, but I don't know, we'll make it work. I didn't think MDF was a good idea to use. Maybe it'll be fine. MDF is straighter, but it's not particularly, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. Is that going to be a problem? It might well be. Yeah, it's split around there, you can see it. Like I say, I'm not sure if that's going to be a problem or not, quite honestly. We're going to continue on and truck on like there's nothing wrong. Right, I'm going to need to remove the riving knife for this, I think. Okay, so I'm going to unplug the saw. Right, now what we need to do, we have our two rails, which are tiny and almost insignificant, is raise them up enough so that they're just flush, just enough with this tabletop. So what we're going to do, what I'm going to attempt to do, is to use some washers. Right, it's not exactly standard, but I'm hoping that these two saw blades might be enough. It's back to they're about as long. They do raise it up by about the same amount of washer wood. It's just slightly out though. I mean, on that side it's not too bad. And that one I think has, yeah, it's a tiny bit of tape that's lifting it up. Ooh. If a tiny bit of tape is enough to lift it up, bear with me. I think if anything, this one isn't particularly straight, so I'm going to have trouble with it. Right, now the question is, how do I attach them to the bottom of the thing? In fact, I think that one more layer of tape should be enough on each side, just to lift it up. That's on there, and they're lifted up now. So really, all I need to do is bond them to the MDF, to this. I'm going to do it about there, because then that's most of the width of the table, and it's avoiding hopefully this pipe piece if I ever decide to use that. It doesn't have to be super tight, you know, it just has to be there. Sorry, when I say super tight, I mean it doesn't have to be super precise. I think what I'm going to do though is mark out, or see where they roughly will come out. It's about roughly there is where the center of the wood is. Again, roughly. Not too worried about accuracy, because ultimately it doesn't matter if these are perfectly in line with each other here. We're only worried about getting them close enough. I think each one's like roughly 30 mil, roughly anyway, so let's say around about 15. Can you stop moving for like 5 seconds, please? Thank you. Right, so those are now in place. So I should be able to just plop that roughly where I want it on the thing, like that. Get some, I think I need some super glue really, or something to bond it together. Right, I don't actually have any super glue on me, but what I do have is double-sided tape, and I thought to myself that'll be good enough, because I just need to hold them in place at the moment. Now, I've seen, I can't remember whose name it is. I'm sure if I remember, I will put it up on the screen right now, that another person used super glue and then glued it with screws. But these are too thin to glue. They're too thin to glue. Not glue, sorry. They're too thin to screw, because basically I won't have enough to go through. There's a 5mm sheet of plywood with 8mm sticks on either side. The head of the screw is going to basically be the majority of what gets screwed in. So what I might do is I might stick them down, and then I might nail them in place. I have a nailer, because ultimately I just need to hold these in place. I think this double-sided tape will do the most of the legwork for me. It'll hold it in place long enough for me to staple it, and once the staples are in, as long as the staples are nice and secure, it should be fine. So let's go and do that. So you just want to line them up again. Again, it doesn't have to be super precise, it just has to be close enough. And this one I've moved quite a lot out. Like that. Alright, so the wood is bent a bit like that. So what I'm going to do is put it down like this, and then I'll put several heavy things on it. Because ultimately all of my stuff is going to be small scale anyway. So let's just double check the measurements here. Okay, so that's give or take about 7.5, or just under. Same for that side. So they're both about 7.5. So I overcut them. That's fine. The 7.5. This is supposed. Oh, sorry, it's a 9mm sheet. It's a 9mm of ply, which may or may not be accurate. Yeah, it's slightly under here, but it'll be slightly more in other places. So give or take. So that gives you 16mm of depth. So 12mm nail should be perfectly fine. I'll go through most layers. I'll have just enough, and I'm going to do it like that, and then do them about 5 times. That should keep it in place, because this is more about keeping the whole thing straight as I'm pushing it through, and about supporting stuff. It's not supposed to be super accurate, and quite honestly nothing I need to do at this point needs to be super accurate. So let me go run the air compressor for a bit. I'm going to be wearing my goggles for this one, because this obviously shoots metal at a high velocity. So it hasn't pierced the top. That was the other thing I was worried about. Right, so that's now stapled down. So that means these will not move no matter what. Now I should have used wood glue, but double-sided tape is good enough. And quite honestly, I don't know how important that all is. But you see where I'm going with this? So now what we need to do, now we've got the actual slidey bit in place, now what we need to do is make the handles. Now I was originally going to use the whole length of, like, whole side of that. And now I'm wondering if that's the best idea. Quite honestly, they're just handles. Like, there are things that I'm gonna take my time with. This is not one of them. That took far longer than it should have. But we now have 2 bits of wood. And this is easier for me to cut down, so. Now, it's probably best that I glue the back down and clamp it down, because the back's never gonna move. What I need to do, you might imagine, once you do this and you cut through it, you'll cut through this and make a line. The back portion, the support, which you don't always need, but I'm gonna do it. Well, it doesn't need to be straight, it doesn't need to be anything. But you want this to be perfectly 90 degrees with the blade. And the reason that you want it to be perfectly 90 degrees with the blade is because otherwise, you bolt something on here, you think it's going to be 90 degrees, and you cut it and it's like 88 degrees or something like that. Okay, maybe not that extreme, but something like that. You know what? Just because this piece of wood is also warped, I think I'm going to ignore the fact that it's going to be wider, and I'll just deal with it as is. Now, if I was being more serious about it, I'd spread it around with my paintbrushes. But guess who left their paintbrushes at home? Now, most people would use their tables on the table saw to clamp it down, but because, well, obvious reasons, I'm not doing that here. But you can glue and shut the back one, but on the front one you definitely don't want to. You want to leave it adjustable. Do I have another clamp for that bow? I actually don't, so I'm going to staple it down, and then I'll staple it down a couple of times, and then I'll move it. I could screw it, but staples are quick and easy for me. The glue will take about 24 hours to dry. Really, we can't do much more until that glue dries. But when it does, then what we'll be able to do is screw on the back side. So again, we're screwing it so that we can keep it adjustable. And then when we're sure, absolutely sure, then we could potentially glue it down if we wanted to. But honestly, once it's screwed in place, I don't think we need to worry about that. But yeah, you can see how it's going to come together. So really, we just need to let the glue dry. Right, it's the next day and the glue has had a chance to dry. But before we get to working on the sled today, just a quick little safety note. Now, throughout this series, the series being this video and the last video, I have been saying that I've been wearing a mask and goggles. That's been mostly true. I mean, when you see me doing cuts on camera and everything like that, I have been using them. But yesterday, after filming the sled portion of the video, I started working on another project, the one that you can see over to the side, which should be on the main channel in a future episode. I didn't then. And when I was going home, I could feel like my breathing was a bit heavier. I definitely felt like I had dust trapped in my throat or the like. See, when you're cutting pine, it's not necessarily too bad, the dust. You will get dust and you will get fine bits, but generally speaking, it's not that bad. The problem was I was cutting MDF. And for those of you who don't know, MDF is essentially sawdust that's been glued together. and it is terrible, absolutely terrible for dust. The problem is I didn't wear a mask when doing that, and all the dust, even though I had dust extractor, I didn't even turn a dust extractor on all the time because I was rushing it. I just wanted to get something done and see how it went. So all that MDF dust blew up, and yeah, I ended up inhaling a fair amount of it, so that was really not good on my part. The other thing is I kept having throwback. Yeah, like that. The problem is, like, when that happened, I was kind of almost in the way of it, because again, I was doing that thing of being between the saw blade. Not a good idea. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm not perfect, but even though I broke my rules, I kind of taught myself not to do it again. Right, with that safety message out of the way, let's get on to this sled. So where we left off yesterday, we glued this piece of wood onto the plywood, and we were hoping that it would straighten out when we did that, and it's kind of done that sort of, but not quite the best, but it's good enough. The only other things I did off camera was I gave this a 120 grit sand just to smooth it out a bit, but it's not perfect. It still needs waxing up really. And to be honest with you, this table saw has this sort of painted surface anyway, so it's not particularly the smoothest anyway. But yeah, what we're going to do now is we're going to take the riving knife out, because this won't work with the riving knife in place, or at least it won't with the that little stud in place. And then we'll basically turn it on and we'll cut down the length a bit. Because what we need to do is we need to get the saw to about here, so that we can line up the saw 90 degrees straight to this. Also, just as a quick thing with the whole sled design itself, you'll notice I've got these two big handlebars. That's not strictly necessary. Quite honestly, the back one can just be maybe say about 2 inches on either side, something like that, just to hold it in place. But it's glued in place now, so I'm just gonna live with it. But yeah, what we'll do is take the riving knife out, cut into it, make the first cut. I'll try to keep it straight when I do, and then we'll get this lined up and bolted in. Also, hopefully by now, I hope I shouldn't have to say, but I do have it unplugged. Right, what you may be able to see is how my riving knife is set up. Not all table saws are the same. Yours may differ if you have one. What you'll need to do is read the instruction manual that came with your table saw, or just use common sense. But this one is just a simple, you want to do this little wing nut here. Do that a few times and it just lifts out. And I'm going to tighten this back up because I don't want a spinning blade right next to a loose piece of metal. Right, when we do this, what we need to remember, we're not cutting this piece of wood in half. No, what we're doing is we're just trying to make a slit through the wood so that whatever we're cutting can go through it. Because what will happen is, usually you'll be cutting something about half the size of this. That's my intention anyway. I'm not making big things right now. If I did, then I could just put a bigger piece of wood on the back. But we're only going to do about a halfway cut, if that. Because the more we use the saw, the more it's going to get cut into anyway. This is kind of a sacrificial piece of wood, so that's how I'm going to treat it right now. What I'm going to do though is just lower the blade to where I think is good enough. Yeah, we'll go with there. I'll also need to take this back fence off. Right, with that, we're ready to cut. So obviously the reason we didn't go all the way through is because we need to measure the blade and actually bolt something here first before we actually cut anything. I didn't have the extractor running through that, oh God's sake. Well, this is a lesson for anyone out there. Go slow and go methodically. If you rush it, you're going to forget stuff. Right, so now what we're going to do is unplug the blade again. Try to turn it on, make sure it doesn't. I'm going to raise up the blade again. Now what we want to do is we want to measure against the blade itself, not the teeth. And I've got this square to help you with that. So the idea is, that I basically you need to clamp this in place, get the blade just so that it's not on any of the teeth, ideally. Right, I don't know if my mic was actually plugged in for that. I'm really annoyed by that. So I'm going to clamp this piece of wood to the gauge. So hopefully now this bar is perfectly straight to the blade. And you can see, maybe you can see, how the wood is not perfectly level with the actual blade. Now that could be one of two reasons. That could be because this wood is bent, or it could be because the street wasn't cut straight, or maybe my blade isn't straight, who knows. Basically I'm measuring here to here on both sides, and they match, so it makes me feel like the blade isn't straight, which is a bit of a problem. I think I figured out what it is. I think this set square isn't particularly square. See, if I line it up here and keep it straight, it does not want to stay perfectly in line with that. Whereas with this other one I have, it's much more happy to do that. So I think I'll use this one instead to measure the blade. Now you may be asking yourself, why does it matter particularly that much? Well, because in all honesty, this is one of those things that if you don't get it right, this will really ruin your projects. So it pays to get it correct now rather than later. I'm going to clamp this to the wood again, or attempt to anyway. Yeah, so that's much straighter, so I think that set square is wrong. That's good to know. See, this is the things that you're trying to find out. What tools don't line up with each other? So by count of me potentially being lucky, the straight edge of this pretty much lines up with the plywood. So it means I got that fairly straight when I did that. So I'm not looking for like a 0.01 degree of accuracy, and not even looking for 0.1 degree of accuracy. I'm just looking for it to be good enough. So what I think I'll do now is I will put some double-sided tape on this piece of wood, and then I'm going to screw it in place. Because I'm going to screw it in place because I don't need or nor want to make it permanent until I'm absolutely sure that this is nice and straight. And once it's nice and straight, then I can be sure, and I can glue it down, and it's all good. Right, but most importantly, is that straight? Let's find out. So we'll slip this to the other side. I'd call that 90 degrees. Now, you may have noticed I didn't cut all the way through, and that's because I haven't actually glued this down yet. And really, I want to keep the wood in place until I do. Now I know this is pretty good, well, close to 90 degrees. What I'm going to do is unscrew the wood, or the bar, and then I'm going to glue it down. Now, why I've done 4, I'll do a 5th one over here, and I'll do one over, actually do a 6th one over here, is so that these holes will perfectly line up with the wood. So when I take this off, even if this plywood splinters a little bit, it's not going to be a big deal. All I'll do is just line up the holes and it should be still 90 degrees. It's a theory, anyway. And it's done, or rather it's good enough for now. Now there are a few things. First of all, you might have seen me using wood reviver. I tried to get paste wax and I was given that, but that said, it slides nice and freely, so that's good enough for me. Now I'm going to make the final cut through this, and then after that, it's pretty much letting the glue set. As far as I know, this should be nice and straight, or straight enough. As far as I know, this should be nice and straight now, and nice 90 degrees. So I should be able to use this for actually cutting serious projects with. As for these offcuts, I'll probably just cut them off off camera, to be honest with you. And then, but otherwise, yeah, pretty much good to go. The only thing I would need to say is, yeah, definitely follow safety procedures. This video has got to be a good example of what happens when you rush stuff, and I don't want other people to go out and give themselves breathing issues. Or the other problem is as well with sawdust is that it's explosive, so you really need to invest in a proper dust extraction system. My little Hoover on the end of a hose works, but not well enough. And if I was going to do this in any serious capacity, I would definitely be putting in a proper dust extractor, at least something that's like cyclonic, so it doesn't clog up the filters so quickly. Anyway, that's going to be it for me for this video. Like I said, if you're interested in seeing my actual main channel content, especially about the Fire Setting 3, there'll be a link in the description to go watch that. Make sure you subscribe over there, and if you like seeing these more raw experimentations with projects, then definitely subscribe to this channel, because there'll be a lot more of that happening very soon. Bye!